Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Winter Storytelling at Travelers Rest. As always, we begin today's program by acknowledging that we are gathered today on the homeland of the Séliš and Coexistence people at a place they named Timsumkli. Their example as the original stewards of this land guides our work today. We learn from many Indigenous artists, elders, and organizations, and we invite you to learn from and support them as well. I want to say a quick thank you to everyone who makes these programs possible. First off, the members of Travelers Rest Connection, you know who you are. Thank you very much for your support. To everybody who is joining us on Zoom that has made a donation through our website. To sponsors like Jackson Contractor Group, Montana Public Radio, and MCAT, Missoula's community media resource, which provided a media assistance grant to record this session. Thanks to Colleen Frank and the Travelers Rest staff for treats this morning. There is a sign-up sheet on the cookie table for anybody that wants to bring treats in a future week. So please sign up. For the folks joining us on Zoom, it's helpful if you keep yourself muted and your video off during the presentation. If you have questions for our speaker, please type them in the chat box on Zoom. We will monitor the chat for questions and for any technical difficulties you might have. I also wanted to note that folks in the room, on some of the chairs you will have seen these little postcards. These are hot off the presses. In fact, they tell you to go to the website for a link, and the link is not active yet, so give me a few days, please. But we're excited that the Travelers Rest Connection is partnering with the Missoula Symphony Orchestra for a fun fundraiser. We will have artworks on display in MSO's office at Higgins in Maine in downtown Missoula for First Fridays in February and March. Those artworks will be available for auction online all through the month, and then we'll have a sort of ending celebration on March 7th as a way to help fill our coffers for programs here and also to partner with some of the other great nonprofits in the area. So please check out the website. On Monday, there will be lots more information. But we'd love to have you come to First Friday, February 7th or March 7th at the MSO offices. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Mandela van Eeden grew up going back and forth between Montana's public lands and a private nature reserve at the most southern tip of Africa. She has worked as an international adventure guide and expedition leader on multiple continents, with a focus on multi-day whitewater expeditions, often living outside in remote places for months at a time. Sounds like Lewis and Clark just a little. For the past 2 decades, she's been the host, writer, and producer of a weekly outdoor adventure radio series, an award-winning podcast called The Trail Less Traveled. The show has been recorded on location in 26 countries with over 630 episodes as of this month. That's a lot. Mandela also works as Director of Content and Community for Explore Maps here in Missoula, serves on the Board of Directors for the Montana Wildlife Federation and the Montana Natural History Center, 2 of our great partners. We're so happy to have you today, Mandela.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. You might see that I have a little bit of a John Wayne walk today, and it's because I did break my leg in October, and I just got into my lace-up brace. So I think it adds a little bit to the adventure, because this is hard work. This is hard work to portage rapids and to run expeditions, sometimes running out of food. I can relate in some ways, even though my adventures are taking place over 200 years after Lewis and Clark's. Some of the places I guide are very relatable. So my focus today is Africa, and that's a very large continent. Okay, we're going to be going all across Africa, so I don't have much time. You guys better buckle up, because we're going to be going on a big adventure. Is it possible to turn some of the lights off a little bit? I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about the river that I guide on in Alaska. So most recently, I have been guiding in the Grand Canyon, where I guide expeditions that are about 15 days in length, and also the Alsek and the Tashinshini rivers. And these rivers slice through the middle of the world's largest non-polar ice cap. This is what the planet may have looked like about 11,700 years ago at the end of the last ice age. We're currently in the Quaternary Ice Age. We're in an interglacial period of that ice age, so it's a warmer period. And as you can see, there was an ice shelf, and people may or may not have used that to come across and into North America. Many indigenous communities in the Pacific Northwest believe that they were here actually before that land bridge. And I wanted to show you a couple different images of the Earth and maps. This is the world's largest non-polar ice cap. This is the remains of the last ice age here. This is some of the world's largest coastal mountain ranges, and where that red line is, that is the Alsek River. And the Alsek River slices right to the middle of that ice cap. We start our expeditions in the Yukon Territory. We go into British Columbia and end in Alaska, in the Gulf of Alaska. And so, when I think about what I have in common with Lewis and Clark, it's hard to think about anything, honestly, when I think about the gear that I have and the food I have access to. You know, before the presentation, I ate a power bar, and I have beautiful merino wool and Gore-Tex. When my clients on the Grand Canyon complain, which people do sometimes, you know, they're tired and, you know, it's sandy and all that stuff. But sometimes, you know, I have to remind them, perspective. Hey, you know, when John Wesley Powell came down the Grand Canyon, they ran out of food, and they were portaging rapids all the time, and, you know, they were burning 5,000 calories a day, and they only were living off maybe 500 a day. And so that sometimes put people in check. In Alaska, we have a lot of mosquitoes, a lot. But, you know, at least they don't have malaria. So you got to put perspective on things. But I do have some things in common with Lewis and Clark, and that is exploring places that have very little people, and we're traveling via the river. But I usually go downstream, right? I hardly ever go upstream. Here's up close at the Alsek River as it slides through that ice cap, and it's 160 miles. You can see that we drop into glacial lakes full of icebergs. And it's a very big braided river. Sometimes it can be 5 miles wide. Sometimes it can be 30 feet across. And it's also critical grizzly bear habitat. The world's largest population of grizzly bears per capita in the entire world. The Canadian Park Service has actually designated this as critical habitat for grizzlies. So like we have squirrels on campus, we have grizzly bears here. They're everywhere. They're not used to humans, but we still take precautions. Here we are coming down on our 18-foot whitewater rafts. We carry all the gear that we need for those 12-day expeditions. And here's a shot. It's actually for a Yeti catalog, but to give you an idea of the whitewater that we're running down there and who we see along the way is a grizzly right on the side of the river. Now, these glacial lakes are very dangerous. Sometimes these glaciers surge, and the whole lake fills up with icebergs, and then we have to get flown out in a helicopter. So this is a very dynamic ecosystem. There is nobody else out there. It's a 36,000 square mile biosphere, and you really do feel the wild when you're out there. And we all wear flares on our PFDs, because if you take the wrong braided channel, there's a chance you might not see the rest of your expedition for the entire length of the journey. So we really take our care to make sure that we get people safely through it. This is a little bit of footage of me running the largest rapid in the Alsek. It's called Lava North, named Lava North after Lava Falls, which is in the Grand Canyon. There's a company I guide for called Sobek, and they are the early forefathers of adventure travel in Africa. And back in the 80s, they had a fantastic schedule where they would go from the Biobío to the Grand Canyon, to the Alsek, over to rivers in Turkey. And after Lava Falls in the Grand Canyon, they named various rivers after Lava Falls. So this is Lava North. On the Biobío, we had Lava South. It's under a dam right now, underwater because of a dam. And then in Turkey, there's Lava East. So we wear dry suits. The water is about 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and sometimes we're running the whitewater with icebergs as well. So it can be very exciting. And you don't want to swim this. This is about 80,000 CFS right here, but by the time we get to the Gulf of Alaska, it's well over 110,000 CFS. And if it gets a heat spell, which, by the way, the climate in Alaska has increased 6 degrees over the last 40 years, which is higher than any increase in any of the states, we do get heat spells, and the river can come up to 500,000 CFS. 500,000 CFS. The last time the Clark Fork got up to about 80,000 CFS, I think, was in 2011. So to give you a little bit of perspective of the power of this water. I love big water, but sometimes we don't run it. Okay, this is a canyon called Turnback Canyon, which is in the middle of the Alsek. We have to have a helicopter come in and fly us over this canyon. So no. Did Lewis and Clark have that? Like, we got to put things in perspective, because, honestly, if a helicopter can't come, you carry your gear around, and that takes 2 weeks, and you're trudging over glacial terrain covered in grizzly bears. So it's pretty exciting. But I'm grateful for modern technology, whether it's the surgery that I had on my broken leg, or the access to a helicopter to fly us over Turnback Canyon. It's a 7-kilometer long section of class 5-6 whitewater. One man survived in 1971. Walt Blackador kayaked it alone, and he wrote a book called Never Turn Back. He's from Idaho, and he barely survived. He said, no one ever should do this ever again. And of course, people did. Some people perish while trying, and others are able to have a badge that they did it successfully. But we don't. We don't take our clients. A helicopter comes in, and I clip these 1,400-pound loads to the bottom of the helicopter. The helicopter then flies it over Turnback Canyon, lands on the other side, drops us off on this gravel island bar, and then we pump all the boats up by hand. That's when I kind of feel like Lewis and Clark a little bit. I'm like, oh, okay, whew, hard work. Pump everything up by hand, and then we go downstream again and continue on our way to the Gulf of Alaska. This is where I'm focusing my time and energy right now when it comes to conservation efforts. I work on conservation all over the world, but in Alaska we've got a lot of stuff that needs to continue to be protected. And so I spend a lot of time up here guiding and also standing behind indigenous groups who are working to protect the rivers and all of the wildlife that call that place their home. So I'm very grateful for my time in Alaska, and I just feel that Alaska has taught me a lot, especially when it comes to expedition travel, because the truth is, in the Grand Canyon, the Park Service will come and get you for free if you break your leg or something like that, but there are still places, luckily, in the world where it's expedition like rafting, and the Grand Canyon is not one, but it is a place I would recommend you go to. What I want to focus on now is the continent of Africa, and I'm going to try my best to cover North Africa, South Africa, and Central South Africa, and some of the rivers that we run there, because it is quite exciting, still to this day. Because in Africa we say TIA whenever anything goes wrong. Do you know what that stands for? This is Africa, right? It's like, oh, a leopard came into camp and took all the steaks. Oof, this is Africa. You come up with a plan. So we do start about 300 million years ago, though. So about 300 million years ago, supercontinents started to break apart in a way that we can represent through, a series of images like this. So this is just theory, but I like looking at the way that things moved around. About 180 million years ago, the North America and Africa started to rift apart after they did collide. And when they rifted apart, they had left the remnants of the Appalachian Mountains and the Atlas Mountains. So those mountains came around at the same time. About 40 million years ago, we have Africa starting to move up towards Europe, and you can see that there was once a sea or an ocean in North Africa where the Sahara Desert is today, and that disappeared. But we do have some of the largest collections of whale skeletons in the Sahara from a time where they were trapped, and it's an amazing place in Egypt. You should go. So when I talk about the way that the continents moved around, I'm also talking about the Sahara Desert a lot, and we really got to expand our thinking, of what things may have looked like 300 million years ago, what things may have looked like 200 million years ago. I want to tell you that the Sahara wasn't always sand, it wasn't always dry. Okay, it turned to sand for the first time about 2 million years ago. The Earth, as it rotates around the sun, has a wobble on its axis, and like a pendulum, every 20,000 years it shifts the location of the West African monsoon. Okay, so the last time that shifted was about 5,500 years ago, which resulted in the largest migration of humans, where they moved out of what was once a fertile place, North Africa, to the Nile Delta. Okay, we got the pyramids going on there. So that happened about 5,500 years ago, so maybe in about 15,000 years it's going to be a swamp again. Who knows? But we do have pictographs and petroglyphs of hippos and people swimming in caves in the Sahara. So it shows that there was once waterways. And even further with that, the evidence that we have of the Tethys Sea Some of the largest mammals were swimming around in here, and early whales. They were trapped in mangrove forests over in Western Egypt. And if you look at radar of North Africa, you can actually see there's huge quantities of water in North Africa, okay? And also grave sites that are right next to what was once lakes, okay? And, you know, lots of fossils of animals that definitely wouldn't survive when it was desert, okay? So it was once water. When you are living in North Africa, when you're living in Sahara, you need to know how to find water. That's basically the bottom line. You got to have that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to find water in North Africa, but what I want to also point out, just to show you how connected everything is, the closest relative to a fish they found in an oasis in Algeria is right down here by Lake Tanganyika in northern Zambia, where I spent most of my time recently guiding and doing conservation work. So at one point there were waterways, rivers, and lakes that connected, so those two fish are closely related. Wadi al-Hitan is, it's called the Valley of the Whales, and that's that place that I was talking about in Egypt where you can find all those skeletons. And then, as I said, pictographs and petroglyphs showing images of people swimming and hippos in what was once super lakes that were much bigger than the Great Lakes that we have here in the United States. The Sahara Desert has enough sand that could cover the earth in about 2 inches of sand if it was spread out equally. It's some of the tallest sand dunes in the world. There are about 2 million people living in Sahara, a lot of nomadic groups that depend on the water. Water is life for them, but there's a lot of trade routes still to this day. Every single year, about 200 million tons of sand from North Africa goes into the ozone layer and travels across the Atlantic Ocean and deposits itself both in the ocean and in the Amazon rainforest. So again, theme, connection. The Amazon gets lots of rain. The rain pushes away the fertile soil. In the Amazon, there's a lot of plants that are competing for nutrients. The sand from North Africa, very fertile sand, is coming over through the ozone layer and depositing. About 100 million tons of sand falls over the Amazon every year that helps bring nutrients to the soil there. Connection, pretty cool. When you are in North Africa, though, that sand is a little bit more evident when it comes in the form of a sandstorm. So I'm going to give you lots of tips today, okay? And who knows if you're ever going to encounter a cobra or a sandstorm like this. But if you do, you'll be like, oh yeah, Mandela talked about how we deal with this. So when a sandstorm comes, number one, you hunker down and stay together. Do not start walking around, okay? This can last for days, and that's partly why we eat so many dates in Sahara in North Africa, because dates don't take much preparation. You just can take them out of your pouch, and you got all your nutrients right there. So there's a lot of different tips and tricks. So having dates in your pocket and don't wander when a sandstorm comes. Gave you a little bit of a background of what's going on in North Africa, and we're going to return there, but I have to go back to my early origins and honor my ancestors and my family in South Africa. So my earliest ancestor in South Africa arrived in 1652, right there where the red mark is. It's a place called Cape Town, and they were part of the Dutch East India Company. So they were explorers, much like Lewis and Clark, and they traveled from India all the way around the most southern tip of Africa and up to the Netherlands. And Cape Town was a refreshment station, a halfway point where they could get off the boat. And if you've ever gotten off the boat or the plane in Cape Town, you can understand why you might not want to get back on that boat, because it is the mother city. It is absolutely fabulous. My grandmother established a private nature reserve in the 1970s during the apartheid regime. And we have these thatch huts, and we have solar power, and we have wells. And we have coexistence here. So the intention is to coexist with the animals that call this place their home. And we also keep an eye out for poachers, illegal fishing, illegal plants, invasive plants that are taking over and causing more and more wildfires. My grandmother reconstructed the main hut, which is on the right, the guest hut on the left, and then off duck where we eat. 1987, the year I was born. And so when people ask me about how long conservation has been a part of my life, it's hard to answer that question because I grew up on a nature reserve. So that's just the way we existed. And that was the way that the people who were living here when Lewis and Clark arrived also existed. Many of the indigenous communities I've interviewed all over the world say, well, they don't really have a word for conservation in our language because that's just how we are. That's how we coexist. It's just how we have always been. And so I think that's pretty neat because that's the way I like to see the world. Conservation and adventure are parallel for me, and that's going to be a theme today. Oh, by the way, those are pictures of little Mandela. I haven't changed too much. I spent a lot of time walking around with tortoises when I was young, and that's me holding a whale rib that washed up on the beach. This is the bontebok, which is the first species in the African continent that almost went extinct because of humans, but also came back because of humans. So there's only about 17 left. Unfortunately, my ancestors killed off many of the native animals because they thought that they competed with the agriculture and the grazing cattle, okay? So there was only 17 bontebok left. Can you all say bontebok? Yes, bok means deer in Southern Africa, in Afrikaans. They can't jump, so that's the only reason they didn't go extinct. They were able to put them all together, kind of like they reintroduced bison in Yellowstone National Park, and they increased the numbers, but because this species can't jump fences, they were able to come back, and now they're well established back in the Cape. Another species that I coexist with on the nature reserve is, it's called a tiger shark, it's called a Zambezi shark. In America, you call them a bull shark. They're known to be able to swim upstream in fresh water. I know you don't want to hear that, but it's true. They have been found in the Mississippi River. They can live in both fresh water and salt water. But again, it's an honor to be able to share an ecosystem with an animal like this. And it's pretty rare that attacks happen on humans. This is a pregnant female that they found upstream on a river that's near the nature reserve. I love sharks. The most famous shark that we share that ecosystem with is the great white shark. And this is not a fake photo. In the world of AI, this one's a real one. This was actually in Paddle magazine. And it was a great white shark that was just following a sea kayaker around in False Bay, which is where they film Shark Week, where the sharks jump out of the water. And that is true. Great white sharks have a specific hunting technique in False Bay where they swim very deep and then they'll see a seal on the surface and they'll turn vertical and swim, breaching completely out of the water when they do their attack. Attacks on humans have gone up since the 80s, but the amount of people in the water has also gone up. So we do know that subadult great whites are coming closer to shore than they otherwise would, partly maybe because of illegal chumming, where they throw blood and fish into the water when humans are in the water, and then sharks are maybe associating the movement and the vibrations of a cage diver with, being fed and blood, so that's not really great. But we do have warning systems at every single beach where you see a white flag that there's usually an alarm sounding, and that means there's a shark in the water right then and there, and everybody has to get out and wait on the beach, and the surfers get so upset because we all know that there's sharks in the water all the time, and it's not like, we really want to stop surfing. But yeah, the green flag means no sharks around. Black flag means conditions are poor. Red flag means there's been a shark in the water in the last hour. And I've never in my life seen a green flag, just so you know. There's the great whites, we got them. Yep, they're amazing. They've been around for at least 34 million years. We also have a lot of snakes, and I love snakes. Snakes keep you on your toes. Right here is my picture of my dad holding a boomslang, which is a tree snake. It's one of the most venomous snakes that we have on the continent of Africa. That's right in front of our home on the nature reserve there. Puff adder is the most common bite that we have in South Africa. They're a very lazy snake. They make a sound to warn you, kind of like a rattlesnake. This one puffs at you, but usually the bites are on the ankle because they don't move. They wait until you actually step on them. And then we have the Cape cobra up on the top right. Cobras are very shy snakes. If you ever had the chance to see one, then it's definitely an honor because they are skittish. And just remember this, okay? If you ever do need to catch a cobra and relocate it, you want to make sure you clean out your cobra transportation kit because other snakes won't go into that when they smell the cobra in there because they are afraid of the cobra. The cobra eats a lot of the other snakes. So probably a pretty useless tip for you over here in Montana, but you never know. You never know. I like to relocate snakes instead of killing them. So this is a keystone species. There are over 5,000 species of dung beetles in the world, okay? We have at least 75 species of dung beetles here in the United States. They don't all fly, they don't all bury dung, but this is a female dung beetle. It's a flightless dung beetle from Addo Elephant National Park. It is endemic to that area. They're not found anywhere else in the world. And they are endangered because the source of poop is endangered, right? Elephant and rhino poop. They prefer elephant poop. They'll ball up the poop and she will actually roll it with her hind legs while the male is following nearby. She has one offspring a year, and they're very maternal beetles, so they only have one offspring a year, and they do bring it up, raise it. So it's kind of unheard of, right? Have you ever heard of a beetle that has one offspring a year and actually has some maternal instincts and raises that one offspring? It's amazing. And the list of benefits to the soil systems and the ecology is incredibly beautiful. Look into dung beetles, keystone species, worth knowing about. Where I learned to love high volume whitewater is on the Orange River Gorge. And this river slices through the southern Kalahari and Namib deserts. Okay, marks the boundary line between Namibia and South Africa. So it's quite the juxtaposition from the Aalsek, slicing through the ice cap. Now we're slicing through desert. And we've talked about desert and rainforest a little bit here. When the desert is actually a very fertile place. So where the river slices through the desert, it's actually very lush. But then as soon as you walk into the desert, you'll see it looks like Mars again. And I'll show you some photos in a moment. I do want to acknowledge that the indigenous peoples in this area are the Khoi, the San. They prefer to be called the Bushmen, okay? According to many ethnomusicologists and linguists, they have the oldest language on planet Earth. The more clicks that you have in your native tongue, the older the language might be. So they have over 15 distinct clicks in their language. Another language that's a click language in South Africa is Xhosa. Xhosa. Can you click your tongue? And then now say Xhosa, Xhosa, Xhosa. So that's the language that Nelson Mandela grew up speaking. Here's a beautiful picture of the Skeleton Coast, and this is the Namib Desert in western Namibia. And as you can see, the Orange River Basin is quite a large area in South Africa. So when that river comes up again, it's high volume whitewater as it heads to the Atlantic Ocean. We have a camp just above Ritchie Falls, which is an unrunnable waterfall, and we portaged that waterfall. Right above the waterfall, we do have a very large rapid with consequences, because if you make a mistake, then that means you're going over the waterfall. I'll never forget the first time I started guiding on this river after I graduated from the University of Montana. I went to Africa to run big whitewater. Some of the guides were throwing up before the rapid, and I was like, oh shoot, I had the same lunch as them. Why am I not throwing up? And they're like, oh no, it's cool. We always do this before this rapid. Just like, nice. Okay, what's downstream? Didn't get a chance to look at it, but it turned out all right. When we're camping above the waterfall, we have to kind of yell, do you want cheese on your burger? Because it's so loud, the roar of the waterfall. You can just imagine just downstream of here. And we carry the rafts around that waterfall, and we abseil or rappel them down into the gorge. And as you can imagine, just like Turnback Canyon on the Aalsek, when that water's constricted, it creates very big, powerful, high-volume whitewater with high consequences, because there's not necessarily places that you can pull over and get out. This is one of the first rapids, and it kind of looks small from this perspective, but I can tell you that that hole on the left side of the river takes up most of the entire left side of the river. And then it just kind of turns around the corner, and for many kilometers, it's nonstop whitewater. And, actually, do I have footage here of running that rapid? See if this works. So this is Africa. I got 4 paddlers, gear in the middle. I think 2 of them are teenage girls. 1 has a broken wrist. Usually we don't have a bunch of gear in the middle of the boat. The boat itself would not hold air. I had to pump it up right before the rapid and put my foot on the hole, and yeah, I mean, it was just like, this is Africa. When I showed up at the put-in, there was no ropes to tie the gear down with, and there was a goat. Here's a confession, there was a goat that was tied to a tree with a nice long rope on it. And I thought the goat didn't really want to be tied up to the tree anymore anyways. And so I let the goat free, and I had just like at least 50 feet of rope. So it was great. So I, you know, when you're on these expeditions, you gotta figure it out. You gotta make a plan. I'm sure that Lewis and Clark too, when they were making a plan right where we are today in 1805, they were coming up with a plan. We have baboons that run alongside us on this river. They are often very curious, and they'll yell things at you. I have had many experiences with baboons, mostly negative, to be honest with you. They can break into the house by opening windows or doors or breaking windows, and then they'll just open up your fridge and your cabinets. And you can imagine just for fun, they open up every single package of food in your house and spread it everywhere. And that's happened so many times in my life. So they're kind of up there with mosquitoes for me, but they are pretty amazing. And they follow us on the river. We also have black spitting cobras. And these are about 7 feet long. They are black, and they spit at movement. They spit a neurotoxin at your eyes. So when you come across, I hope you guys are taking notes. When you come across a black spitting cobra, you want to wiggle your fingers down here. It's going to be hard to remember, but when we get nervous, we sometimes blink a lot, and they spit the neurotoxin at your eyes. And they have incredible aim. Like if I was a black spitting cobra, I could probably spit and hit that video camera and get all you guys on Zoom right now. Okay? But you wiggle your fingers, and they will spit the venom at your fingertips instead of your eyes. But, you know, just keep an eye out when you go walking in Africa, and you know, if you have the chance to encounter an animal like this, it's very lucky. It's not like they're out there to get you, okay? We also have Parabithus granulatus, which is one of the more venomous species of scorpions on the continent. And there have been times where, unfortunately, people got stung, but mostly it's because they have the scorpion crawled up on their PFD, and you need to shake it out. So when you're on an expedition, you got to shake things out before you put your shoes on or anything like that, because you never know who could have crawled in there, and you don't want to get stung. Okay? Expedition mentality is what I call it on the Grand Canyon. All right? Any decision that you make will affect the entire group. I've had a couple of close calls on my time of guiding, and one of them was in Africa on the Orange when there was a flash flood. So the water came up at night. It happens very fast, just like you see on the footage and film. We climbed out of the gorge where we were, and the next morning when I woke up, there were footprints of a leopard who had come and smelt my head while I was sleeping, and encircled me, and then circled the guide next to me, and then went over to the river and took a drink, and then walked back upstream. So it was a pretty amazing encounter that I was grateful for, even though I didn't get to meet that leopard. We only have about 18 Cape leopards left in South Africa. They're a little bit smaller than the leopards that you find in southern Central Africa, but they have also made a comeback. They kind of have a story similar to mountain lions here in this part of the world. We're going to completely shift, okay? We're going all the way up to Morocco now. This is where I guide a river called the Ahansel River, and the river spills from the Middle Atlas Mountains towards the Sahara. And this journey happened in 2018 or 19. I was sent there as the expedition leader with a bunch, I don't know what generations below me. Is it like millennials? What would you guys, can you help me out here? Z. My little sister's 19. What is?
Gen Z.
Okay, so Gen Z. I was called Old Lady Mandela. I was the oldest one. I think it was only in my early 30s, but I think I'd already had a limp at that point. And it was a very interesting trip that started with a drive from central England all the way to Morocco. During that drive, the battery did catch fire somewhere outside of Paris. When we got to the gateway to Africa and Tangier, crossing the strait between Spain and North Africa, we were told that when we enter customs in Africa, make sure they don't know that we're doing river expeditions. Just tell them that you're a bunch of friends going rafting. I'm like, the side of the van says family river trips in Africa. But it turned out okay. And it was a pretty amazing place to be guiding. I was based in Jimali Fanal Square in Morocco, in Marrakesh. That means the place of punishment. This is a place that in about the 1700s, people were executed in the square, but it's been around since about 1300. And this is a place where you will encounter cobras with snake charmers, and unfortunately these snakes, a lot of the times the venom is removed, their fangs are removed. They're kind of seen as disposable because they use them to make money with the tourists, and then they'll throw them out and get another snake. But because of that, there's very few of these cobras left. So just be really mindful when you're in places like this to think about where your money's going when it comes to the animals that are in the square. Because you also see monkeys. These macaw monkeys are the only other native primate to North Africa besides humans, and they're declining as well because of the illegal trade, and also because the forests where they call their home are being removed. I spent quite a lot of time with locals, and I do that with my radio show. I spend as much time with the community as I can, immersing myself. This is Aziz. He speaks about 6 languages fluently, and we have like matching friendship bracelets in this photo in the square in Marrakesh. He's called Le Gram, because in French it means the gram, because he's so small, he's little. And we were inseparable, so they called me Le Kilo, because I was much bigger than him. So it's a really fun nickname that I got when I was guiding in North Africa. When you're in North Africa as well, specifically Morocco, you may drink Moroccan whiskey. It's just a fun name for it because in that Islamic culture, there is not a lot of alcohol consumption. So rather, you have green tea mixed with lots of beautiful herbs, and then about 5 times as much sugar as you might think is necessary. So I definitely came back from Morocco with a sugar addiction. But it's beautiful, and you pour the tea by holding the pot way high up to create a nice long stream. So good energy can go into that stream, and also produces bubbles, because when you're drinking tea in Sahara Desert and the wind blows sand, if the bubbles are on top of the tea, the bubbles will catch the sand instead of the sand getting in your tea. So another nice tip for you as you're drinking tea in North Africa. This is a village where, this kind of give you a close-up of where I was guiding, North Africa, Sahara Desert. These are the Atlas Mountains. I was in the middle Atlas Mountains. The river it's a creek, actually. Well, it's a river, but it's like a creek compared to the Zambezi and the other rivers I guide on. We have a warehouse high up in the village of Ouarzazate. We take our clients on a 7-hour drive from Marrakesh all the way up into the high mountaintops up there. The Middle Atlas is the last village that we go through. And then we start the trip, and this river, the Ahansal, is very steep. You'll find lots of macaws along the way. Luckily, they're still there. Before we go, we do an exploratory mission to see if there's any bridges that the nomadic herders may have built that we need to remove, or strainers that we need to remove with a chainsaw before we take clients down, because this is, again, very remote. There's not a lot of help out there. We're the only company that does it. So the exploratory mission, sometimes I got to be in my kayak, other times in a raft, and it's beautiful and very challenging, and it ends with the Grand Canyon of Morocco. So after the 4-day trip, we come end through this canyon here, and it's very narrow. At high water, it's very, very, very dangerous, and there's some places where the raft barely fits through. But it makes it worth it. And I wish I could tell you that it ended with that beautiful Grand Canyon of Morocco, but the truth is that it actually ends with what's called the soup. So this is, it's a bunch of dead trees and animals and garbage that's floating on the top of the reservoir, because there is a dam downstream, so it gets backed up, and so for a few hours we have to paddle through the soup. It's not a very romantic way to end the expedition, but I think it's also good to see, in reality, what it's like now. That's what happens, unfortunately. That's some footage of us. We would have the boats single file, paddling. As soon as the boat in the front has too much garbage and trees in front of it, then we have the boat in the back take its place, okay? I guess kind of like geese migration, After I guided there, I spent a lot of time in North Africa with Tuareg, Amizar, Bedouin, and Arab men who I interviewed. And if you ever want to listen to those, you can listen to them on the Trail Less Traveled. But I learned a lot from them during that time. They live in nomadic tents, and they do lots of poetry and storytelling. They eat meals together. They really make time to connect with family. And I just wish that we had more of that, to be honest with you. But I am grateful to be able to have learned from them and learn about their relationship with camels as well. Baby camels are born white. They are carried on the backs of the mother or the father when they're young, and camel milk can actually help to choose the name of your child. It's kind of said in North Africa that a nomad without a camel is like a nomad without a scarf. They would never not have a scarf or a turban, so they would never not have a camel. Camels are amazing creatures, long eyelashes to prevent the sand from getting in their eyes. And they only mate when it rains. This is have you guys recognize this? The camel spider, called a sun spider in Arizona, that can get to be bigger than a foot long. Sometimes you might feel like they're chasing you, but the truth is that even if they're running towards you, they're probably trying to get into your shade. Okay, so when you run into them in Sahara, and something like this is running at you and it's a foot long, it can be kind of intimidating. I can almost guarantee that when it gets to your shade, it's going to be like, oh, thanks. Cool. Nice and chilly over here. But they're very fast. We call them the Kalahari Ferrari, where I guide on the Orange River in Namibia. This is a wadi, or it's where you can find an oasis. So you look for water in the valleys where it's flat, and you just dig down, and you will eventually find water. The water is warm, and it's often a rusty color, and it's fossilized water a lot of the times because it's coming from this aquifer, okay, from those ancient rains that were trapped in mud. And so it's pretty amazing to be able to find water in Sahara, and a lot of weddings take place there because it's so sacred and special to have water. The last place that I want to talk to you about today is the Zambezi River in Zambia. My most recent project is working with Game Rangers International, and they have a holistic approach to conservation, which includes wildlife rescue, resource protection, and community outreach. It's in Zambia, which is surrounded by the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Angola, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, and Tanzania. So it's landlocked. It's an incredible country. I would highly recommend that you visit. It's very little crime as well in Zambia, which is very different than South Africa. And when I spent time on the lower Zambezi recently, I saw 4 different leopards in 1 week. So it's just nice to know that there are still wild places and ecosystems that can host a variety of carnivores like that. It's probably most famous for this place. In English, it's called Victoria Falls. Livingston is on the Zambia side, and Victoria Falls is on the Zimbabwe side. Victoria Falls is the name of a town as well as these waterfalls. Can you say Musi Otunya? That means the smoke that thunders. And that's the Tonga name for this waterfall, okay? If you look, you see how it's a zigzag pattern? So it falls over the gorge. As we run, this is the biggest whitewater in the world, the Zambezi. It goes in a zigzag pattern. And the reason for that is there was a period of time where there was cracks formed when the continents separated, and eventually it was covered in water, and sediments got into those cracks. And now that the river is redirecting its course, it's eating away at the sediment. And so if you look closely, you can see that there's actually a new gorge forming right here. So every 10,000 years, it eats a new curtain of rock away. Does that make sense? So this would have been 20,000 years ago. So every 10,000 years, it eats back. And you can see that zigzag pattern if you look at the map here and look at, what was going on about 50,000 years ago. This is the biggest whitewater that you can run commercially in the world, the Zambezi River. And we put in right below Victoria Falls, Musi Otunya. Usually the crocodiles that come over the falls are small. And when I say small, they're about 6 feet long, about my size. It's pretty good size dinosaurs, but the big ones are like 15, 18 feet long, 2,000 pounds. Those crocodiles usually die when they go over the waterfalls because they're so heavy. So it's not uncommon to be going down the Zambezi and seeing a 20-foot crocodile float by, dead. But we do have living ones, lots. Over 250,000 crocodiles downstream on the lower Zambezi where it's flat, and I'm going to show you pictures of that later. I guess, I'm going to go over just a little bit because I want to tell you about how to survive a crocodile attack. There's some stuff that we just have to talk about. I can't feel good about this presentation unless we go over stuff like that. So I just want to, share that on the Zambezi, when you flip your raft, which is going to happen at least once or twice, You have to get back on top and reflip it fast because the crocodiles do hang out downstream of the rapids sometimes. The farther downstream you go, the more they collect. But this is a rapid called rapid number 5, highway to hell, stairway to heaven. Even if you do run it right, you can flip in the catcher's mitt. And it's a pool drop river. It's warm. So on pool drop rivers like the Grand Canyon, you have very big drops, and then right after the drop, you've got a pool. So usually, by the time you realize you've flipped and you're in the water, you're already through the rapid. Usually, doesn't always go that way. But this is the rapid number 7, or Gulliver's Travels. It's the longest rapid in the Zambezi. I'm underwater at this point. Yep. This is rapid number 9. This is Ghost Rider. No, not Ghost Rider, sorry. We don't this is the Portage Rapid, so we don't even take people down it. Kayakers do run this, but we usually send the boat down empty, and there's a kayaker downstream who picks up the boat. We walk our clients alongside. It's not worth it to take people down that rapid. Although you can see, the boat takes a great line on its own. It doesn't even need anybody in the boat. I reckon Lewis and Clark did this too. I mean, you know, if you can send a boat down, but if they were using wooden boats, then they're probably doing something called lining. Okay, if you think about what rapids would have been on the Columbia before the series of dams were built, you know, and lining is extremely dangerous. They put ropes all over the boats, and they'll take them down, and there'll be teams, and they try their best to keep the boat off the rocks. So that kind of gives you a little bit of perspective of what may have happened. But that's a rubber raft versus wood, so it's going to be a lot different. Crocodiles. I was looking at a beautiful drawing at the Montana Natural History Center the other day. There's a guy there who, Mr. Boone, right? Yeah. He is a paleontologist. He also draws dinosaurs, and they're going to have an art show coming up here. It's worth looking at. It's so cool. But in that painting of T-Rex, there's a crocodile in the same body of water, just chilling out. So just to remind you, crocodiles have been around since T-Rex. You go to the Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., you'll see the crocodile skeleton is with all the dinosaur skeletons. The difference between a crocodile and an alligator. Crocodiles have the teeth from the top and the bottom. Alligators, you only see the top teeth. Crocodiles have more of a triangle-y shaped snout, and alligators are more rounded. Crocodiles are also green. Alligators are more gray. Crocodiles are way more likely to eat you as well. But not as likely as a saltwater crocodile, but that's in Australia, and I'm going to talk about that next time, okay? The Nyami Nyami is on the right. That is the god of the Zambezi. It's worth recognizing him, okay? He has the body of a serpent and the head of a crocodile, and his wife, she was separated from him when they built the dam, the Kariba Dam, in 1955. And every river guide on the Zambezi will wear Nyami Nyami around their neck as a way to have protection when they run that whitewater that we just saw. But this is farther downstream. This is at the Kariba Dam. When they built this dam, they relocated 57,000 people to places where there was no water, so they couldn't farm. And many of those people who I interviewed were forced to become poachers, okay? Because you don't always just choose to be a poacher. If you have to take care of your family, you may get forced into something like subsistence poaching. So as you can see, there's a totem for Nyami Nyami right at the dam. There was a series of dams that were built, and there's actually a proposed one right now called the Batoka Gorge Dam, which if it was built, it would flood all of the rapids that you just saw on the Zambezi. And it would also really affect almost every single villager that I spoke to, because they all rely on taking people rafting down the Zambezi for their income. Whether they're a chef, a kayaker, a porter, you have to carry the boats in and out of a deep gorge. There's no way to drive the boats down there. They carry them by hand. And so something just to be aware of, that dams are continuing to be built around the world, and many of them are in Africa. But far, far, far downstream, okay, the Zambezi is the 4th largest river in Africa. And it's not always whitewater. At the lower Zambezi, it's very, very, very flat and calm, but it's full of crocodiles and hippos and so many other species. It's an incredible ecosystem. Besides mosquitoes and humans, this is probably the most dangerous animal on the African continent, the hippo. When we go canoeing in Africa, like Lewis and Clark canoeing, we are canoeing with hippos and crocodiles. So what you do, you can imagine Lewis and Clark being on the canoe and canoeing a couple paddle strokes and then tapping the front of the wooden canoe with their paddle. That's how they send vibrations and sounds into the water, so we can let the hippos know that we're there. Usually after we tap our canoe, the hippo will put their head up and they'll look around, they'll shake their ears and they'll look around, and that way you can give them a lot of space. Because if they come up underneath your canoe, they will bite it in half. I've interviewed 2 people who had that happen. In Africa, our safety talk is not to swim back to the boat. In America, we say, okay. In many parts of the world, we say, when the boat flips, swim back to the raft. In Africa, if there's a hippo involved, swim as far away from the boat as you possibly can, because the hippo is going to go for the boat. Okay? Remember that? Yeah. This is a family group of female elephants who are crossing the Zambezi from Zambia into Zimbabwe. You can tell it's a female group because there's different ages of the calves. The females always stay together. Okay, so there's a very good chance that there's sisters, aunts, nieces in this group here. And they don't recognize international boundaries, so they cross the river whenever they'd like. And unfortunately, we have seen a decline in elephants on the African continent. In the 1930s, there was a census done that showed there was 10 million elephants on the African continent. Now we have around 400,000. Okay? The forest elephant has almost been entirely wiped out, partly because of deforestation due to chocolate crops. So just to be mindful of that. And unfortunately, about 40% of the female elephants who are found dead are pregnant. So they're also knocking out the next generation as well. But Game Rangers International, they're one of the only organizations in the world that will actually rescue orphan elephant calves and reintroduce them into the wild. And it takes about 8 to 13 years to do that. They've successfully reintroduced 60. There are many stockholds of ivory all over the world. In some countries, like in Kenya, they burn the ivory symbolically, but unfortunately when they burn the ivory, that makes the ivory prices go up, okay? You can also sell the ivory and use the money that you make from selling the ivory to put towards protecting elephants. But is it a good idea to put ivory back into the market and make it okay? So if this was an easy issue to solve, it would have been already solved. It's a very complex issue, but there are a lot of positive things happening in Africa, and I wanted to take a moment just to spotlight the work being done by Game Rangers International, because what they're doing in Zambia can really spill out into the rest of the continent and the world when it comes to connecting communities with conservation efforts, okay? So, Game Rangers International, their motto is, we are all rangers, so everyone is a ranger. They do have people who are working on the ground, like this group here, who are actually the SAPU, the Special Anti-Poaching Unit, that goes out, and that's the resource protection aspect. And so they will go out and they will apprehend poachers, they will confiscate illegal weapons, they'll remove snares from the environment, lots and lots of snares are out there. And they're also, they train dogs so that dogs can smell ivory, rhino horn, illegal weapons. There's trade of illegal plants as well. These are some of the guns that they've confiscated and snares. And they're training now village dogs. So the village dogs are now learning to be part of the SAPU Special Anti-Poaching Unit. So it's really cool because the village dogs are used to how hot it gets in Zambia. They grew up there, so it's pretty amazing that the village dogs are getting included now as well. So it's a collective effort, right? Everybody's involved. I spend a lot of time interviewing the SAPU, the Special Anti-Poaching Unit. This man here, he was flown up to London to receive an international award for his work. He's been part of the SAPU for the last 30 years. And I mean, he does risk his life every time he goes out there on patrol. They spend about 21 days in the field. They sleep out in the bush. And they do pretty amazing work to protect these keystone species. Unfortunately, when an elephant calf is orphaned, they'll have to bottle feed it every 3 hours with a special formula to get it to being a subadult. By the time it's a subadult, then they'll relocate it to the elephant release facility, which is in Kafue National Park. And by the way, you can be a volunteer there. They do one of the most incredible volunteer programs in the world. It's 3 weeks in Zambia, where you spend a week with the elephants in the nursery, you spend a week with the elephants at the elephant release facility, and then you spend a week with the Special Anti-Poaching Unit. And it's amazing. So if you have any questions about that, I could definitely answer. Or you can just look into going and being a volunteer with Game Rangers International. So you can actually be there and help with your hands. They're doing pretty extensive studies as well, looking at elephant calves and their PTSD, because a lot of these calves actually witness their parents being killed. And you know, it's sometimes they, even though they're being fed every 3 hours with these special formulas, and these keepers sleep with them. They're with them 24/7. These keepers are with the elephant calves more than they are with their own families. And they do that up until their age 8, or not age 8, until about 8 to 13 years, when the elephant is ready to actually get accepted into another group and decide to go and be in the wild. They relocate the subadults to the elephant release facility, where we walk with the elephants twice a day. So if you're a volunteer here, you'll go and walk with the elephants. You don't like hug the elephants and touch them, because we don't want the elephants to think that humans are okay. But you do spend time walking with the elephants. You can see them start to learn to become elephants. How do you graze? You know, is a hyena a friend? Is a lion a friend? All of these things. And they always have an armed scout with them who's just protecting. Some of the volunteers there, they go into the communities to spread conservation education. So teaching people that, you know, a living elephant is much more valuable than a dead one. And teaching the farmers how to grow chili peppers so that the chili peppers can help keep the elephants out, or teaching them how to be beekeepers, because elephants don't like bumblebees. So there's a lot of different ways that they can teach them to coexist. But my bread and butter, my favorite thing in the whole world, is being with kids. Usually I bring a didgeridoo to my presentations. I'm very sorry that that didn't come today, but come next time, I promise I'll bring one, especially if we talk about Australia. But I use the didgeridoo as a skeleton key of choice to play music with the kids. And then when they're interested, we can really talk about conservation and travel and adventure and stuff like that. But with these communities, I was learning about how they can coexist, because it's not just poaching. These communities, a lot of the time, they are dealing with elephants that are eating their entire crop, which is their entire savings. And when they do that, then they're forced to, you know, take other measures, and it could be poaching to take care of their families. But this is what an elephant can do to a crop in just 30 minutes. A lot of the times they store grains in these wicker baskets that they weave by hand, so we're trying to build cement containers so they can be more protected from the elephants. And a lot of the farmers are women who are actually going out and making crops, and then for the majority of the country, the women are actually taking care of the village, whether they're selling goat milk, chicken eggs, clothing, or farming. And in this picture here, I'm actually talking to them about climate change. They're experiencing a lot of the same things as we are, with temperature spikes and flash floods and wildfires. It's pretty amazing. Sometimes I would actually forget that I was in Zambia when I was talking to people, because it sounded like stuff that we were dealing with in Montana. It's pretty amazing. It's a picture of someone holding some chili peppers in their hands. And in closing, you know, black rhinos are unfortunately no longer in Zambia, but we have some places in the world, including South Africa, where the black rhinos are I'm just going to be honest with you. We lose 3 black rhinos every 24 hours in South Africa because of poaching. The horn is used for theoretical medicinal purposes in parts of Asia, but it's actually the same as your fingernail when it comes to the keratin that horn is made up of. Black rhinos will often false charge you. Okay, the difference between a black rhino and a white rhino, besides the fact that a white rhino is never false charging you, a white rhino is definitely going to continue on its path, is black rhinos their mouths are shaped to eat rushes and shrubs, so they have a triangle-shaped lips to eat trees. White rhino has a flat lip to eat grass, okay? And unfortunately, the northern white rhino has almost been diminished to extinction. This is one of the females that's left. She's too old to reproduce, but she does have, as you can see, actually 5 armed guards with her at all times. But recently, good news, they have actually taken her eggs, and then they took semen from the last white rhino male before he died, and they were able to put that into the womb of a southern white rhino, and they were able to bring back the species that way. But do we need to get to that point where we had to bring the species back at that level? So it's just pretty amazing the work that they're continuing to do, and you can be part of it if you volunteer. So I just wanted to encourage you all to be a part of that. The very last slide that I want to do is just go ahead and get your cell phone out if you don't mind, and take a picture of this. Because David Attenborough He writes back every single time, I promise you. I've been writing to him since I was little. If you haven't written a thank you to David Attenborough or a birthday card, please do. He turns 99 on May 8th. All that David asks is that you include a self-addressed envelope. David is 99. He can't wait for you to, finally write him a thank you card, a birthday card. So please, especially if you have kids in your life, he loves it when little kids draw pictures of animals and send them to him, okay? So he's my hero, and I just want to make sure that we all acknowledge him while he's still around. Because conservation is not a spectator sport, right? It's a collective effort, and I really feel that living in these valleys, especially in Missoula, it's a privilege, and with privilege comes responsibility, okay? So getting educated, getting engaged, and I feel like no one can fill his shoes, but we can all carry on his torch. And as we say in Africa, it's a proverb. If you think you are too small to make a difference, you haven't spent the night with a mosquito. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I'm sure Mandela would like to answer questions if anybody has any. Oh, in the back. And I'll probably repeat the question so that the folks on Zoom can hear.
How'd you break your leg?
How'd you break your leg?
That's a good story. So, I really hope my mom's not watching. I ride adventure motorcycles, and I was on the historic Lolo corridor, the Lolo Trail, where Lewis and Clark was walking. They were walking back in 1805. I was on that trail, and a tree branch reached out and grabbed the buckle on my saddlebag where I carry my camping gear. And it ripped the buckle off, and unfortunately sent that 470-pound motorcycle right on my ankle. And it broke. The tibia fibula broke. And I don't slow down on my own, so the universe sent me a clear message there. I think that I needed to just take a moment and rest in Missoula, and I have put my roots down. I know we talked about adventure, but one of the questions, I just want to answer it before it's asked, where's my favorite place in the world? The more I travel, the more I appreciate Missoula. The access that we have here, the rivers that we have here, it is very special. The only thing it doesn't have for me is the ocean. But hey, we've got a surf wave in the middle of town, so. Yeah, I'm just so incredibly grateful to be here. So to have this winter to be here and rest and actually nest a little bit. My mom grew up in Valier, Montana. She's a fourth generation Montanan who went to the University of Montana. And she recently moved back to Missoula in September. So yeah, I'm here and I'm really grateful. I do travel, but the more and more I travel, the more I want to just come back to Missoula.
Anybody else? There any questions on Zoom too? We'll take this one first.
I was just wondering if you're on this, you said you were coming back. When are you
Coming back? Oh, I don't know. We were talking about it.
So the question was, when is Mandela coming back to town and dress? We'll let you know. Okay. We haven't figured that out yet. So I'm going to ask a question.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm noticing as you're talking about travel, and as we all read the Lewis and Clark journals, there's a lot of entries about the apex predators,
Yeah.
and about the little things that'll kill you.
Yeah.
But you did start with, okay, I'm not going to remember how to say it. The
Alsec.
After that, in Africa, the antelope-looking.
Oh, the bontebok.
Bontebok.
Yes.
Bontebok.
Yeah.
I don't remember that. Maybe help me. Bontebok. Are those kind of animals, as they're coming back, have they ever been domesticated in Africa? Are they, you were talking about the conflict with cattle. I'm just kind of curious how changes in the landscape and the economy have continued to affect animals there, the way that we see conflict here.
Oh, well, that's a really big question, but I will say that in South Africa in particular, if your fence is tall enough that you can keep a kudu or a springbok or an impala in an enclosure, then that animal is yours, theoretically. But as soon as that animal jumps the fence and gets into your neighbor's area or yard, it's theirs. We don't have as many public lands. We don't have public lands in South Africa. We have fragmented ecosystems, which are national parks. Okay, so that's why, again, so grateful for Missoula, so grateful for our public lands and access to those public lands. Because when you go hunting in Southern Africa, a lot of the times it's on a farm. And there's a lot of different ones. There's hunting that is, where there's a fence involved, and there's also hunting where it's an open area and it feels a little bit more like Montana. But they do farm game meat. We have biltong, which is a dried steak that we eat, and I think that probably Lewis and Clark were eating a lot of dried meats as well. So I harvested a whitetail buck on the other side, over by the Sapphires in November. I used my crutches as a bipod. There's a great picture out there. My doctor actually saw it on Facebook. But so I'm going to make that springbok into some biltong, and a lot of the times we'll do turn both cattle and game into this dried meat. And we do have a lot of different areas where the animals are theoretically wild, but more and more you do see people farming. And one of the reasons why rhinos are making a comeback is because there was one private investor who actually has a very large swath of land where they're raising rhinos. And one of their approaches is to flood the market with the horns that they're naturally shaving off those rhinos, rather than, a lot of the times they'll take a chainsaw and they'll remove the front of the animal's face to get the horn out. But when they farm the rhinos this way, they're able to just kind of like your fingernail clippings, And so there's so many different approaches. And to give you an idea of how complex it is, I'm doing a whole series on hunting in Africa and also with the North American model of conservation here in the United States. That one of the approaches to hunting in Africa is called green hunting, where they'll actually shoot a rhino or an elephant with a tranquilizer gun. And then the person who shoots it has about 4 minutes to take a photo, a selfie with that animal, before that animal wakes up and goes on its way. Which, when I first heard about that, I thought, wow, that is so interesting. That money, though, that person paid, $50,000, $100,000, does go back into the local communities and conservation. But one of the weird sides there is that those animals sometimes get addicted to those tranquilizers, so they only get to shoot them once a year. Because if not, then the rhino actually runs up to the Land Rover waiting, like, hey, I'm ready. So it is just really interesting. And what day is it? Saturday?
Yeah.
Friends, my radio show airs on the Trail 103.3 every Sunday night at 6 p.m. Please set a reminder and listen tomorrow night, because it's an interview with Diane Boyd. And she is the Jane Goodall of wolves. I was just up in her natural habitat interviewing her just the other day when I gave this same presentation up on Flathead Lake. And so she talks about coexistence, and it's also a perspective that's not, it's not partisan. She just shares science-based information, and then you get to make up your own mind about carnivores like wolves and grizzly bears. But when I'm doing work in South Africa, the closest relationship I have to the most controversial conservation issues here in Montana, that being wolves, grizzly bears, mountain lions, but mostly wolves, I think about leopards. Because the farmers in South Africa, my family, dairy farmers, the leopards do eat sometimes their cattle and their sheep. It's very rare, but it happens. But one of the things that I really admire about what they've done is they study the DNA of the leopard's dung. And they found that only 4% of their diet is actually livestock, 4%. And so when they were able to give that information to the farmers and teach them things in terms of enclosures they can build to keep the leopards out, it's made a huge difference. And there's more and more leopards and more happy farmers. So there's no simple answer. Thanks for asking that question. I hope that helps to shed a little light.
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating, that parallels that are pretty easy to draw between, as you said, what is happening in Montana and what is happening all over the world. Any other questions? Yeah.
What time is your podcast on?
6.
The podcast is on 6 o'clock on Sundays on the Trail.
And I would definitely recommend listening to the radio version, because the person chooses music, and the podcast version doesn't have music. The radio version that's on the Trail local radio, it does have music. So listen to the radio show if you can. Yeah.
Just curious, you've traveled most of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an area that's still wild that you have not gotten to yet that you really want to get to?
For the folks on Zoom, is there a wild place that Mandela has not visited yet that you would like to?
Gosh. I think about the ocean, and some of the deepest parts of the ocean, you know. There's an incredible book that I just read called The Abyss, and it's the conservation efforts in the deep sea. And for me, when I think about exotic places, I think about what the ocean looks like 36,000 feet below the surface. And so that, if I could, I would want to explore the deep sea. But in reality, I'm not sure if that's going to happen. I don't like cold water anyways. So, yeah, I mean, I really would like to go to Borneo and see flowers that are the size of the screen, you know, and just some of the more temperate rainforests of the world, you know, and because it's just amazing all the medicine that comes from those rainforests as well. And just the Amazon, if you look at how much of the medicine that we use every single day and in the ingredients that come from the Amazon, and if you look about the percentage that we've actually investigated, it's, you know, a very small percentage of that rainforest that we've investigated. So just to think, as the rainforest goes away every day, there's potential cures to cancer and other diseases, you know, that are going away. So I'm fascinated by the natural world and ways in which we can learn from these plants and animals and peoples that live there. So I think the jungle calls to me besides the deep ocean.
Anybody else? Question. I just was thinking through my LinkedIn about they're building a wall of trees across Africa. Have you heard about this?
No.
So the question was something that popped up on social media about a wall of trees being built across Africa. But Mandela, you're going to have to go. And
What country? Do you know?
Across the entire continent.
Wow.
So at the top to block to create like a barrier. Anyway, so I don't know if anyone else has been doing that.
I have, yeah. I think it's along the southern part of the Sahara
along the
Oh, wow.
to try to slow the desert.
Oh, to slow the creep of the desert. All right, well, now there's someplace for you to go and investigate.
Yeah.
And bring it the next time.
Yeah, and you know, I love it when my clients on the river ask me a question where I'm like, hey, I don't know. Let's look it up, rather than make up an answer, you know? And so I'm definitely gonna be looking into that immediately, but I do wanna say that even though people often think about Africa being so primitive, like we do have 3G, Wi-Fi, and cell service in much of the continent, and you know, pretty advanced in terms of the ways in which we can decrease the use of plastics. There are multiple countries within the continent of Africa who have actually outlawed plastic bags. You know, there's a young woman in Nairobi, Kenya, who figured out a way to turn microplastics and plastic bags into building blocks so that sidewalks can be built, so that buildings can be built using plastics. So, yeah, there's a lot of incredible advancements that are happening on the continent of Africa, and I reckon you ought to go. Don't you think? You know, right? Just do it, right? It's never going to be the perfect time, but I think I would highly recommend going to Africa. And all those critters I showed you, the sharks and the snakes, you'd be lucky if you saw one. I just see them a lot because I live out there with them, okay? But where you are going to be, I don't think you need to worry too much about snakes.
That's great.
And by the way, my family in Africa thinks Montana is incredibly exotic. With all of the grizzly bears that we have, you know, this is all a different shift in perspective.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you again to Mandela for a great program.
Thank you.
We will be here again next week with Steve Collar, who is talking about birding for boomers. So even if you're not a boomer, I want you here to learn more about birding. And we'll see you then.